In an era when the world was divided by religion and empire, when journeys were perilous and loyalty was tested by fire, one man emerged as the epitome of courage and chivalry: Richard. His name still echoes through the halls of history as the king who led the Crusader armies through the treacherous deserts of the Holy Land, locked in a legendary rivalry with the great Muslim leader Saladin. This is a story of war and diplomacy, passion and betrayal, valor and sacrifice. It is a tale that carved the fate of nations and shaped the legacy of the English crown for centuries. Join us on this gripping journey into the heart of medieval conflict and royal daring, and discover how the actions of one king made history forever. Early life and rise of Richard the Lionheart. Richard I, famously known as Richard the Lionheart, was born on September 8, 1157, at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, England. He was the third son of King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of medieval Europe's most influential and powerful women. As a younger son, Richard was not initially expected to inherit the English crown, but his prowess as a warrior and leader would soon set him apart. Tall, strong, and fiercely determined, Richard was deeply influenced by his mother Eleanor's love for the arts and chivalry. Spending much of his youth in Aquitaine, a duchy in southwestern France inherited from Eleanor, Richard was made Count of Putia. Stepping into governance early, his adolescence was marked by military campaigns to suppress rebellious barons in Aquitaine, where he proved a capable commander. Richard's charisma and bravery earned him the nickname Coeur de Lionheart of the Lion by his French subjects, a title that would follow him into history. Despite his strong connection to France, his loyalty to his English heritage remained firm. The death of his elder brothers and his father, Henry II, unexpectedly propelled Richard to the English throne in 1189. Richard's accession came at a time of crusading fervor. Eager to join the Third Crusade to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control, Richard quickly prepared for war, leaving England in 1190. His reign was dominated more by battles abroad than governance at home, spending only about 6 months of his 10-year reign on English soil. Richard's early life crafted the archetype of the medieval warrior king: brave, tactical, and fiercely loyal to the ideals of chivalry and Christian righteousness. His legacy began not just with his birthright, but his audacious ambition to lead, fight, and inspire. The Third Crusade. Battles against Saladin. Richard the Lionheart's reign is inseparable from his role as a central figure in the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, a Christian military expedition aimed at recapturing Jerusalem and other lands lost to the Muslim leader Saladin. After his ascension, Richard quickly departed England to join this holy war, setting sail towards the Levant and forging alliances with fellow monarchs like Philip II of France. One of the earliest major achievements was the Siege of Acre, which had lasted for 2 years by the time Richard arrived in 1191. His forces participated in breaking the city's defenses, ultimately securing its surrender. This victory was vital as Acre became the Crusaders' foothold on the eastern Mediterranean coast and a strategic base for further operations. The most famous battle under Richard's command was the Battle of Arsif on September 7, 1191. At Ars, just south of Acre near the city of Jaffa, Richard faced Saladin's forces in a fierce confrontation. Despite harassment and challenges, Richard's disciplined knights launched a decisive charge, breaking Saladin's lines and gaining control of the coastal route. This battle significantly boosted Crusader morale and exemplified Richard's leadership and tactical genius. Following Arsif, Richard led his troops to capture Jaffa, a strategic port city, securing it against subsequent Saladin attacks. The battle for Jaffa, marked by intense close-quarters combat, ended in a Crusader victory when Saladin tactically retreated to avoid total defeat. Richard's military successes, however, were tempered by the ultimate inability to recapture Jerusalem. Despite prolonged negotiations and further skirmishes, an armistice was signed in 1192 that allowed Christian pilgrims access to holy sites, but left the city under Muslim control. Richard's prowess in battle earned him admiration and fear across Christendom and the Muslim world alike. His valor and strategic acumen during the Third Crusade remain defining elements of his legacy, symbolizing the boldness and complexity of crusading warfare. Political challenges in captivity. Richard the Lionheart's crusading ambitions set the stage not only for his military triumphs, but also for considerable political challenges. While his martial prowess was without question, his absence from England triggered instability at home. Left to rule as regents were his younger brother John and the ambitious Philip II of France, each with their own agendas that threatened Richard's title and lands. As Richard journeyed back from the Holy Land in 1192, his journey took a perilous turn. Traveling incognito through Austria, he was captured near Vienna by Duke Leopold V, whom he had offended during the Crusade. His subsequent imprisonment, which lasted almost 2 years under the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, held England in political limbo and fueled uncertainty. The ransom demanded for Richard's release was enormous, an unprecedented sum of 150,000 marks, equivalent to several years of English crown revenue. This financial burden severely strained his kingdom and demanded heavy taxation, impacting his subjects and creating political pressures that his lieutenants had to navigate carefully. Richard's captivity revealed the vulnerabilities of a monarch who spent most of his reign abroad, highlighted the complexities of feudal loyalties across Europe. His absence also provided opportunity for rebellion and power struggles back home, necessitating deft political maneuvering upon his eventual return in 1194. Despite these challenges, Richard continued to assert his authority, resuming control and punishing those disloyal during his absence. His experiences during captivity and political instability underscored the intertwined hardships of medieval kingship leadership, demanded military might, political finesse, and overwhelming resilience. This period in Richard's life reflects not only the heroism of crusading, but the very real costs and political perils that accompanied his legendary status. The politics of power, Richard's rule at home and abroad. Richard's reign was marked by a dynamic tension between his duties as King of England and his ambitions on the continent and in the Crusades. Much of his kingship was spent away from his kingdom, creating both opportunities and challenges for his governance. At home, Richard's frequent absences meant he delegated authority to trusted officials and regents, notably William de Longchamp and later Hubert Walter. However, these regents faced resistance as barons vied for influence, exploiting Richard's absence to strengthen their own power bases. Richard's brother John became a focal point for dissent, plotting to usurp power while the crown was weak. Richard understood the necessity of maintaining control over his French territories and Normandy, Aquitaine, and English holdings. Concurrently, navigating the complex web of French, English, and Crusader politics demanded diplomatic skill and military readiness. His rivalry with Philip II of France extended beyond the battlefield into the realm of strategic marriages, alliances, and territorial maneuvering. Financially, Richard's crusading expeditions strained resources, forcing slashes in royal spending and increased taxation, which frustrated his subjects. Despite these strains, he remained immensely popular due to his chivalric image and military prowess. Richard also adeptly manipulated the symbolism of kingship. He cultivated the image of the ideal medieval crusader king, epitomizing courage, religious devotion, and martial skill. This image inspired loyalty among knights and commoners alike, bolstering his legitimacy even in absence. Furthermore, Richard's legal reforms, though limited by his short and peripatetic reign, strengthened royal justice and asserted the monarchy's sovereignty against feudal lords, setting precedents for English governance. Internationally, Richard forged strategic alliances through marriages and treaties to fortify his position and coordinate efforts across Christendom. His contributions reshaped not just the political landscape of England. Part 5. The years of captivity and return. Richard the Lionheart's reign was famously spent largely away from England, focused instead on crusading in the Holy Land and managing his vast territories in France. However, his journey home from the Third Crusade was interrupted by a dramatic and politically charged captivity that profoundly affected his kingdom. In December 1192, while returning secretly through Central Europe, Richard was captured near Vienna by Duke Leopold V of Austria. Leopold held a grudge against Richard for insulting him during the crusade. Richard was then handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who imprisoned him in harsh conditions and demanded a tremendous ransom for his release. The ransom demanded was around 150,000 silver marks. an enormous sum that equated to roughly 2 years' worth of revenue from the English crown. Thoraicitis, heavy taxation, was imposed on the English people, prompting widespread hardship and some unrest. Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, played a crucial role in securing funds and negotiating his release. After 14 months of captivity, he was finally released in February 1194 upon payment of the ransom. Upon his return, Richard swiftly moved to reassert his authority, traveling to Normandy and Aquitaine to quash rebellions and curb the influence of his brother, John and King Philip II of France, who had taken advantage of Richard's absence to press their claims. Despite his efforts, Richard spent little time in England after returning. The years that followed were plagued by intermittent warfare on the continent, as Richard defended his French possessions and vied for dominance against Philip II. Richard's captivity and years of struggle illuminate the precarious nature of medieval kingship, reliant not only on military might, but on diplomacy, loyalty, and the ability to maintain control across dispersed and contested territories. UT had lasting impacts on European diplomacy. Richard's reign was a balancing act between conquest, administration, and representation of monarchical ideals, a testament to the multifaceted role medieval kings had to fulfill. The years of captivity and return, Richard the Lionheart's reign was famously spent largely away from England, focused instead on crusading in the Holy Land and managing his vast territories in France. However, his journey home from the Third Crusade was interrupted by a dramatic and politically charged captivity that profoundly affected his kingdom. In December 1192, while returning secretly through Central Europe, Richard was captured near Vienna by Duke Leopold V of Austria. Leopold held a grudge against Richard for insulting him during the crusade. Richard was then handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who imprisoned him in harsh conditions and demanded a tremendous ransom for his release. The ransom demanded was around 150,000 silver marks, an enormous sum that equated to roughly 2 years' worth of revenue from the English crown. To raise this, heavy taxation was imposed on the English people, prompting widespread hardship and some unrest. Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, played a crucial role in securing funds and negotiating his release. After 14 months of captivity, he was finally released in February 1194 upon payment of the ransom. Upon his return, Richard swiftly moved to reassert his authority, traveling to Normandy and Aquitaine to quash rebellions and curb the influence of his brother, John and King Philip II of France, who had taken advantage of Richard's absence to press their claims. Despite his efforts, Richard spent little time in England after returning. The years that followed were plagued by intermittent warfare on the continent, as Richard defended his French possessions and vied for dominance against Philip II. Richard's captivity and years of struggle illuminate the precarious nature of medieval kingship, reliant not only on military might, but on diplomacy, loyalty, and the ability to maintain control across dispersed and contested territories. The final years and death of Richard the Lionheart, after his triumphant yet arduous campaigns in the Holy Land and his dramatic captivity. Richard the Lionheart returned to his continental holdings to defend and consolidate his territories. His final years were marked by relentless military engagements throughout France, defending his Duchy of Aquitaine and maintaining the expansive Angevin Empire against the growing ambitions of King Philip II of France. In early 1199, Richard laid siege to the rebellious castle of Chalais-Chabrol in the Limousin region, determined to suppress the dissent that threatened his control. It was here, during one of his inspection rounds, near the castle walls, that a crossbow bolt struck Richard's left shoulder. Initially regarded as a minor wound, it soon became infected, developing gangrene. Despite the best efforts of his physicians and herbal treatments, his condition worsened rapidly. The injury proved fatal. Richard the Lionheart died on April 6, 1199, at the age of 41. His death marked the end of a storied reign dominated by his martial prowess and dedication to the Crusader cause, but characterized by relatively brief periods spent on English soil. According to legend, the crossbow bolt was fired by a young local boy seeking revenge for the loss of his family during the siege. Richard famously pardoned the boy on his deathbed, exemplifying both his chivalrous nature and complex humanity. Richard was succeeded by his brother John, a monarch whose reign would face significant challenges and eventually lead to the signing of the Magna Carta. Death encapsulated the perils of medieval warfare, and kingship concluding a life that epitomized the ideals of knighthood and the complex interplay of duty, ambition, and legacy. Death, legacy, and the end of an era. Richard the Lionheart's life was a tapestry woven with bravery, strategic genius, and relentless pursuit of crusader ideals. But it ended in an unexpected and sobering moment, far from the grand battlefields. In March 1199, while besieging the castle of Chalestrebrol in Lima, France, Richard was struck by a crossbow bolt fired by a defending soldier. Initially, the wound might have seemed manageable, but it soon became infected. Despite the desperate attempts of his doctors, the injury worsened and developed gangrene, leading to intense pain and inevitable decline. On April 6, 1199, Richard passed away in his mother Eleanor of Aquitaine's arms. His death, at the age of 41, ended a reign marked more by valiant campaigns abroad than governance at home. Richard left no legitimate heirs, and the throne passed to his brother John, whose troubled reign marked a different chapter in English history. True to his chivalrous nature, Richard forgave the crossbowman who shot him before his death, a final act of mercy emblematic of his complex character. Though Richard spent little time ruling England, his legend as the quintessential warrior king and crusader endured. His military leadership in the Third Crusade, especially at battles like Arsef and Jaffa, established his reputation across Christendom and among his Muslim adversaries. Richard's legacy is one of courage and martial prowess, but also of sacrifice and the immense burdens of kingship during turbulent times. He became a symbol of the ideal medieval monarch, embodying the spirit of chivalry, honor, and devotion to faith, echoing through centuries of British royal history and popular culture. This period closed the chapter on a daring and passionate king whose life encapsulated the ideals and contradictions of medieval royalty. King John and the Magna Carta, a kingdom in turmoil after the death of Richard the Lionheart in 1199. The throne passed to his younger brother John, a ruler whose reign would become synonymous with political strife, territorial loss, and the quest for balance between authority and justice. King John inherited a sprawling Angevin empire, but his tenure was marked by a steady erosion of power, especially in his French territories. Repeated military defeats, including the loss of Normandy to King Philip II of France, weakened the English crown's position both abroad and at home. These territorial setbacks fueled resentment among the English nobility and barons, who felt burdened by John's heavy taxation and arbitrary justice. John's rule was characterized by his attempts to centralize authority and enforce royal prerogatives, often alienating the church, nobility, and common people. Conflicts with Pope Innocent III over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury led to England being placed under interdict, further damaging John's reputation. Discontent among the barons reached a tipping point in 1215 when a rebellion forced King John to assent to Magna Carta, or the Great Charter, at Runnymede. This historic document aimed to curb royal abuses, guaranteeing that the king was not above the law and protecting baronial rights. Magna Carta demanded limitations on taxation, protection of church rights, and due process for freemen. It established principles that would influence constitutional law around the world, though King John soon reneged on the charter, plunging the kingdom into civil war. Magna Carta symbolism endured. John's death in 1216 did not end the kingdom's struggles, but the charter was reissued and reaffirmed by his son, Henry III, embedding a legacy of constitutional governance that reshaped the monarchy. King John's reign serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of autocracy and the beginnings of modern parliamentary democracy, illustrating how royal authority had to evolve to survive in a changing political landscape. Henry III and the reaffirmation of Magna Carta following King John's tumultuous reign. His 9-year-old son, Henry III, ascended the throne in 1216 amidst civil unrest and shifting loyalties. One of Henry's earliest acts, pressured by rebel barons and his regents, was to reaffirm the Magna Carta, to restore stability and renew allegiance to the crown. In 1225, Henry issued a definitive version of Magna Carta, sealing the charter with greater authority, which cemented its role as a cornerstone of English constitutional law. This confirmed that the monarch was not above the law, limiting royal power and protecting the rights of nobles and freemen. Henry's reign saw continuing strife between the crown and nobility. The emergence of Simon de Montfort during Henry's minority led to a baronial revolt, which questioned royal absolutism, and resulted in the Provisions of Oxford in 1258, an early experiment in parliamentary governance. Although Henry later regained power and reasserted royal authority, the confirmations of Magna Carta through his reign established enduring principles of limited monarchy and the rule of law. His long reign also witnessed growth in commerce, population, and the early foundations of English parliamentary institutions, setting the stage for the evolving monarchy, balancing tradition and authority. This period reflects the gradual but critical evolution of monarchy from autocratic rule towards constitutional governance, influenced heavily by treaties forged in conflict and negotiation. Simon de Montfort and the Baronial Revolt 1258-1267. The turbulent reign of Henry III witnessed one of the most significant challenges to royal authority in medieval England, the Baronial Revolt, led by Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester. This revolt marked a critical juncture in the evolution of the English monarchy towards constitutionalism and parliamentary governance. By 1258, discontent with Henry III's perceived mismanagement, favoritism towards foreign advisors, and fiscal extravagance had reached a boiling point. Simon de Montfort emerged as the leader of a coalition of rebellious barons demanding reform. The group forced the king to accept the Provisions of Oxford, a groundbreaking document that effectively curtailed absolute royal power. It established a council of barons to oversee the king's decisions and mandated regular parliaments to check the crown's authority. De Montfort's leadership was both charismatic and controversial. He initially sought compromise, but conflicts erupted when the king attempted to reassert control. In 1263, de Montfort captured Henry III in the Battle of Lewes, becoming the kingdom's de facto ruler. Significantly, in 1265, Simon de Montfort called what is often regarded as England's first representative parliament, including not just nobles but commoners, 2 knights from each shire, and 2 burgesses from towns of revolutionary step, towards modern democracy. However, his reign was short-lived. The tide turned in 1265 at the Battle of Evesham, where royalist forces defeated de Montfort, who was killed in the conflict. Simon de Montfort's revolt, while ultimately unsuccessful militarily, laid foundational principles for limiting monarchy, expanding political representation, and enforcing accountability that reverberate in constitutional monarchies today. Edward I, the strategic king and legal reformer Edward I, known as Edward Long, reigned from 1272 to 1307, and his leadership marked a pivotal era in English history, reflecting a transformation in governance, military strategy, and legal reform. His rule restored royal authority after the turbulence of his father Henry III's reign and solidified the monarchy's role in shaping a more centralized England. One of Edward's most decisive accomplishments was his military conquest of Wales. In 1277, he launched a campaign against Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, the Welsh prince, successfully defeating Welsh resistance and annexing Wales to the English crown. When a subsequent Welsh revolt arose in 1282, Edward responded with overwhelming force, leading to the death of Llywelyn and the subjugation of Wales. To maintain control, Edward constructed an imposing ring of castles around the region, monuments of medieval military architecture as symbols of English dominance. Edward's vision extended beyond Wales. He sought to assert dominance over Scotland through political arbitration that quickly devolved into outright warfare. After the Scottish succession crisis in the 1290s, Edward claimed suzerainty, demanding fealty from Scottish nobles. The resulting wars of Scottish independence witnessed fierce and protracted struggle, with signatories like William Wallace resisting English control. Though Edward won several battles, including the significant Battle of Falkirk, Scottish resistance endured beyond his reign. In legal reforms, Edward earned recognition as the English Justinian for overhauling common law. His statutes, especially the Statute of Westminster, 1275, and Statute of Quo Warranto, 1290, curtailed feudal abuses, clarified legal rights, and limited both the power of the church and rebellious barons. Edward fortified Parliament's role, making it a permanent institution essential for legitimizing taxation and royal policies. However, Edward's reign was not without controversy. His policies imposed heavy taxes to fund military campaigns, straining the nobility and common people. His edict expelling Jews from England in 1290 was a dark legacy reflecting medieval social intolerance. Edward I's reign blended military rigor, legal innovation, and political acumen, leaving a legacy of a more unified yet contested English kingdom, stronger institutions, and a vision of monarchy intertwined with emerging parliamentary governance.